Hi everyone. Those of you who were at the IUCN conference in Belfast last year will recall that we presented a poster on a project to deliver a soil map for the Falklands. That was really an attempt to get an estimate of the extent of the peatlands of the Falklands and the extent of the amount of carbon that was stored there. I'm happy to report that that project is now complete, just complete, and as you can see, it's a multidisciplinary project with a wide range of organisations and locations contributing to it. So what I want to present today is just some of the outputs from the project and the use to which we hope to put the online soil map to for the Falklands. The Falklands really are an important peatland resource. They're about 12,000 kilometres squared, an island in the south of a group of islands in the South Atlantic. They're the largest UK overseas territory in terms of peatland resource, and they make a significant contribution to the UK's overall peatland stocks. The soils in the Falklands are mainly shallow, fairly poorly developed, and they're fairly high organic matter soils, mainly peats. Really, that's a function of the climate, a cool, dry climate and very windy. And there are concerns over the climate change predictions from the islands. Those are that the temperature, there will be approximately a 30% increase in temperature over the next 80 to 100 years. And that coupled with more winds and perhaps changes in rainfall patterns leads to risks of to the thin, shallow soils, of drying out, of soil moisture deficits, and drier vegetation, which is greater at risk from fires and hence causing erosion. So following the climate concerns, a few years ago, we commenced the project. It was realized that one of the tools in our armory to help make the management of the lands of the Falklands more climate resilient, what was lacking really was detailed information on the soils, on the extent of the soils, the soil type, and of the peatland resource. The islands are extensively grazed by a small number of large farms. There has been a fairly high density of sheep grazing over the past 100 years, 600 to 700,000 sheep. That is now falling off to a more sustainable level, but a lot of the grasslands have been overgrazed, and that has increased the risk of erosion on them. And we have no real baseline or an estimate of the extent of erosion or of the estimate of the peat and hence the carbon stock in the islands. So we started 2.5 years ago, we started the Digital Soil Modelling Project, which is based on 2 modelling phases. The first was really based at the James Hutton Institute, was to select the points where fieldwork would be carried out in the Falklands. That selection was based on overlaying existing geology maps, soil maps, topography, habitat and vegetation. Then on that basis selecting about 200 points which covered all of the combinations of those, which would give enough to produce a digital map. And at those 200 points over 2 field seasons in the Falklands, soil pits were digging, soil samples were collected, detailed field descriptions were made, and those soil samples were then processed for physical and chemical analyses. The second phase of the modelling involved feeding that data into generate computer online maps of the distribution of the soils that recorded from the sampling exercise. So the outputs from the project have been, first of all, to produce a soil class map that has been valuable in terms of setting the Falklands in the classification of sort of world soil classification. Then it's also been important that the maps are available as tools for farmers to improve their land management. For example, now each individual farmer can have their own farm, their online map tailored to their own farm. That will give them information on many of the parameters of the soil, as well as the extent of the peat and the risk of erosion. Falkland Island government obviously will find the output from the soil map very useful. It will give them a much more accurate handle on the extent of peatlands in the Falklands and how much carbon is actually stored on which to base future storage targets. We estimate from the maps that approximately 40 to 45% of the islands are peat covered. That's almost 6,000 square kilometres, which is a substantive contribution to the UK peat resource. And that's storing probably approximately 540 megatons of carbon in the soil. One of the novel aspects of the project was that measurements were made of soil microbiology. Samples were collected in the field and taken back to the Natural History Museum in UK for analysis using DNA sequencing. And these are the first really detailed analysis of soil microbiology we have from the Falklands. And there were some surprisingly and interesting results. For example, we discovered that rhizobia were found in some soils, and those were previously unrecorded. And that's important when we're thinking about soil health, about monitoring soil health, and which soils might be more resilient in the future. Mycorrhizal fungi were not present or with very low abundance, but other root saprophytic fungi were found, though they weren't mycorrhizal. But that's important in relation to soil depth and to relation to soil health. We got a lot of valuable new information on laying down parameters for soil health and on the management of soils to make them potentially more climate resilient. But the main benefits really will be to the stakeholders who are farmers and other landowners in the islands. From the farmer's perspective, first of all, I mean, the soil maps in many cases were just confirmation of the intuitive knowledge they had of their own soils. But having an online resource enabled them to sit down and plan ahead for their large farm, which paddock, for example, had the potential to be the most productive. They could select better areas they might consider for reseeding in terms of their soil health potential or nutrient levels in the soil. And in relation to erosion risk, they could then make informed decisions on how they could change their stocking density to reduce their risk to erosion in the future, given the climate changes that they were experiencing. And for example, they could consider moving fence lines if they wanted to incorporate different soil classes that might have more potential. So we measured that range of elements in the soil. All of those were measured and mapped around the islands, and also we were able to generate maps of peat depth. From that, we were able to calculate the amount of peat and carbon stored in the island. So a very valuable resource, giving us a much better handle on the extent and the importance of the peatlands of the Falklands. And the next stage of the project is really to look at the application of it in much more detail and to translate the valuable information there to on-ground soil health and soil resilience strategies. Thank you very much.
everyone. Thank you for your interest in this presentation. I would like to present the work that we've done in iCASP at the University of Leeds, along with my colleagues. My name is Emmanouil Tyllianakis, and the protocol that I would like to present is what we call the Deliberative Monetary Valuation Protocol. The application is on peatland restoration, and I would like to show you briefly what is this protocol all about and why you can actually use it in your own research, in your own field. Finding the economic value of peatlands, the value that people place on peatlands, either as a specific site or multiple sites, can be difficult, mainly because it's subjective. It depends on people and how these people value peatlands, and therefore can be inherently complicated. The people's knowledge of peatlands, their perceptions about them, and also their preferences for their management are actually really important. People are also social beings, so there are group dynamics when you ask people about their preferences for peatland management or restoration. As such, getting values, economic values for peatlands can also be resource intensive. There are meetings between practitioners, meetings between scientists and researchers, and cooperation between these groups can be difficult, and also sort of communication issues might exist between those groups. The result might be that the public doesn't get a value and doesn't get a result that is actually useful to them, and the values for peatlands can be subject to a lot of criticism. The literature in the past few years has been pointing towards deliberative practices as a way of providing better clarity for these economic values and actions. The idea behind it is that when you allow for people to come together in groups, receive and share information, this can help people to have better formed preferences, therefore have better certainty when they're asked to place an economic value on something such as a peatland site. The protocol provides you with the following. First, it gives you step-by-step guidelines on how to implement it, easy common mistakes that people make when they run these deliberative sessions, the type of material you need, the type of personnel you need to have in place in order to run them. Also provides you with a complete list of supplementary material that will be required for you to carry out these deliberative workshops. It also allows you to generate 3 different kinds of economic values. We call them individual, input-driven, and group-shared values. Shortly, I'm going to explain them one by one. And finally, it provides you with an understanding of how individual and group-shared values are being formed and how they drive the economic values. And this understanding is provided to you in a quantitative manner. So if you implement this, we believe that you're going to have a comprehensive but also a simplified approach that enables practitioners to implement deliberative valuation workshops without the help of experts. This is a ready-to-use tool, a ready-to-use protocol, and has all the scientific advice and input you need already in it. Because it's really accessible, it's also cost-efficient, and can be applied, as I said before, in any type of ecosystem services management. In this case, I'm going to be presenting an application on peatland restoration. The protocol itself contains information about how to set up a deliberative session. It gives you detailed advice on how to perform your sampling, how do you recruit your participants, how you define your case study. Is it going to be just one case study site that you're going to be interested in, or are you interested in several sites across a region, or are you interested in something that's happening across the country? It also gives you advice on how you set up your session. How many people do you invite? How do you set them up? How do you invite them? What type of material do you need? Are you going to compensate them or not for their time? We give you advice on how you actually can do that. The protocol allows you, as we've just seen, to generate 3 different types of of values. The first value is what we call individual value. This value comes when people are asked to state how much they're willing to contribute for the restoration of a specific peatland site. As people come to your deliberative workshop, you ask them to fill in a question card, evaluation question card, just like the one you see in the example. In this card, and in any type of valuation card, people are asked to consider a scenario, a hypothetical scenario. You have a peatland site that is being degraded, is being damaged, and there are some actions that could mitigate these impacts. And in this valuation card, in any valuation card, you also advise people, you give them information on what could be these improvements. You ask them how much they're willing to contribute. This is the first value that can be generated. The second value that can be generated is asked in exactly the same way, but after information has been provided. The information can come in the form of a presentation. You have an expert who comes in, who explains the benefits of peatlands, who explains the impact of, for example, human activity, or people can actually have a site visit. They can go in for a walk around a peatland site, a specific peatland site, and then go back and consider the same question. How much are you willing to contribute for a project that could restore this site in a specific, up to a specific point? Finally, we come to the deliberation part of the protocol. The protocol gives you information how you can split people, the people who have come into the workshop, how you can split them into groups. And then you are given information how you can help the individuals in these groups to self-define themselves. In a sense, to anchor themselves into who they are as individuals, and also ask them to act as representatives of other groups of society. By doing so, people are able to think not just for themselves, but also for others. We do so through the use of what is called the Q method. The protocol gives you advice and specific information on how you apply it. And this gives you an orientation of where individuals and groups are actually placed in the spectrum of how much they're interested in others, how much they're interested for the environment, how much they put them, how highly they consider the environment to be valuable to them. Then you ask people within those groups to consider a similar scenario. You ask them in this case, how much would be a fair allocation of the public budget, for the restoration of a peatland site? And then each group votes on what could that budget be, how much would that allocation would be in order for this to be a fair allocation of public money. Then, if you're interested in one shared value, you can have what we call a democratic value. You ask all of these groups to come and present what were the value that each group agreed on, and then have a vote on it. In this case, if you collect all of these values, you have 4 different types of values. Why use this protocol, and when can you use it? You should use it because it is adaptable to your needs. In this case, we presented an application for peatland restoration. It's freely accessible online, and is also tailored to practitioners' use. And as we also mentioned in the protocol itself, you should be cautious when you try to use the outputs of this protocol if you implement the deliberation in order to support your business cases. Not all of the economic values presented are actually helpful for this. Thank you for your attention so far. So if you're interested in the protocol, you can find it in the first link, along with its resources, along with a training video with more detailed information on how you actually apply it. And if you're interested in other methods for other economic methods in order to measure the value of peatlands, you can also find it on the iCASP website on the second link. Once again, thank you for your interest in this presentation.